Poirot?" I cried. "A car has just driven up. Giroux is in it, and Jack Renaud, and 2 gendarmes." "Sacre tonnerre," growled Poirot. "That animal of a Giroux, could he not wait? I shall not be able to replace the things in this last drawer with the proper method. Let us be quick." Unceremoniously he tumbled out the things on the floor, mostly ties and handkerchiefs. Suddenly, with a cry of triumph, Poirot pounced on something, a small square of cardboard, evidently a photograph. Thrusting it into his pocket, he returned the things pell-mell to the drawer, and seizing me by the arm dragged me out of the room and down the stairs. In the hall stood Giroux, contemplating his prisoner. "Good afternoon, Monsieur Giroux," said Poirot. Have we here?" Giroux nodded his head towards Jack. "He was trying to make a getaway, but I was too sharp for him. He's under arrest for the murder of his father, Monsieur Paul Renaud." Poirot wheeled round to confront the boy, who was leaning limply against the door, his face ashy pale. "What do you say to that, jeune homme?" Jack Renaud stared at him stonily. "Nothing," he said. "19 use my grey cells." I was dumbfounded. Up to the last, I had not been able to bring myself to believe Jack Renaud guilty. I had expected a ringing proclamation of his innocence when Poirot challenged him, but now, watching him as he stood, white and limp against the wall, and hearing the damning admission fall from his lips, I doubted no longer. But Poirot had turned to Giroux. "What are your grounds for arresting him? Do you expect me to give them to you?" "As a matter of courtesy, yes." Giroux looked at him doubtfully. He was torn between a desire to rouse rudely and the pleasure of triumphing over his adversary. "You think I have made a mistake?" he sneered. "It would not surprise me," replied Poirot, with a soupçon of malice. Giroux's face took on a deeper tinge of red. "Eh bien, come in here. You shall judge for yourself." He flung open the door of the salon, and we passed in, leaving Jack Renaud in the care of the 2 other men. "Now, Monsieur Poirot," said Giroux, laying his head on the table, and speaking with the uttermost sarcasm, "I will treat you to a little lecture on detective work. I will show how we moderns work." "Bien," said Poirot, composing himself to listen. "I will show you how admirably the old guard can listen." And he leaned back and closed his eyes, opening them for a moment to remark, "Do not fear that I shall sleep. I will attend most carefully." "Of course," began Giroux, "I soon saw all that Chilean tomfoolery. 2 men were in it, but they were not mysterious foreigners. All that was a blind." "Very creditable so far, my dear Giroux," murmured Poirot. "Especially after that clever trick of theirs with the match and cigarette end." Giroux glared, but continued. "A man must have been connected with the case, in order to dig the grave. There is no man who actually benefits by the crime, but there was a man who thought he would benefit. I heard of Jack Renaud's quarrel with his father, and of the threats that he had used. The motive was established. Now as to means. Jack Renaud was in Merlinville that night. He concealed the fact which turned suspicion into certainty. Then we found a second victim stabbed with the same dagger. We know when that dagger was stolen. Captain Hastings here can fix the time. Jack Renaud, arriving from Cherbourg, was the only person who could have taken it. I have accounted for all the other members of the household." Poirot interrupted. "You are wrong. There is one other person who could have taken the dagger." "You refer to Monsieur Stoner?" "He arrived at the front door, in an automobile which had brought him straight from Calais." "Ah! Believe me, I have looked into everything. Monsieur Jack Renaud arrived by train. An hour elapsed between his arrival and the moment when he presented himself at the house. Without doubt, he saw Captain Hastings and his companion leave the shed, slipped in himself and took the dagger, stabbed his accomplice in the shed who was already dead." Giroux shrugged his shoulders. "Possibly he did not observe that. He may have judged him to be sleeping. Without doubt they had a rendezvous. In any case he knew this apparent second murder would greatly complicate the case." "It did. But it could not deceive Monsieur Giroux," murmured Poirot. "You mock at me. But I will give you one last irrefutable proof. Madame Renaud's story was false, a fabrication from beginning to end. We believe Madame Renaud to have loved her husband, yet she lied to shield his murderer. For whom will a woman lie? Sometimes for herself, usually for the man she loves, always for her children. That is the last, the irrefutable proof. You cannot get round it. Giroux paused, flushed, and triumphant. Poirot regarded him steadily. That is my case, said Giroux. Have you to say to it? Only that there is one thing you have failed to take into account. What is that? Jack Renaud was presumably acquainted with the planning out of the golf course. He knew that the body would be discovered almost at once, when they started to dig the bunker. Giroux let out loud. But it is idiotic what you say there. He wanted the body to be found. Until it was found, he could not presume death, and would have been unable to enter into his inheritance. I saw a quick flash of green in Poirot's eyes as he rose to his feet. Then why bury it? He asked very softly. Reflect, Giroux. Since it was to Jack Renaud's advantage that the body should be found without delay, why dig a grave at all? Giroux did not reply. The question found him unprepared. He shrugged his shoulders as though to intimate that it was of no importance. Poirot moved towards the door. I followed him. There is one more thing that you have failed to take into account, he said over his shoulder. What is that? The piece of lead piping, said Poirot, and left the room. Jack Renaud still stood in the hall, with a white dumb face, but as we came out of the salon he looked up sharply. At the same moment there was the sound of a footfall on the staircase. Mrs. Renaud was descending it. At the sight of her son, standing between the two myrmidons of the law, she stopped as though petrified. Jack, she faltered. Jack, what is Fluis? He looked up at her, his face set. They have arrested me, mother. She uttered a piercing cry, and before anyone could get to her, swayed, and fell heavily. We both ran to her and lifted her up. In a minute Poirot stood up again. She has cut her head badly, on the corner of the stairs. I fancy there is slight concussion also. If Giroux wants a statement from her, he will have to wait. She will probably be unconscious for at least a week. Denise and Frangois had run to their mistress, and leaving her in their charge Poirot left the house. He walked with his head down, frowning thoughtful. For some time I did not speak, but at last I ventured to put a question to him. Do you believe then, in spite of all appearances to the contrary, that Jack Renaud may not be guilty? Poirot did not answer at once, but after a long wait he said gravely, I do not know, Hastings. There is just a chance of it. Of course Giroux is all wrong from beginning to end. If Jack Renaud is guilty, it is in spite of Giroux's arguments, not because of them. And the gravest indictment against him is known only to me. What is that? I asked, impressed. If I would use your grey cells, and see the whole case clearly as I do, you too would perceive it, my friend. This was what I called one of Poirot's irritating answers. He went on, without waiting for me to speak, let us walk this way to the sea. We will sit on that little mound there, overlooking the beach, and review the case. You shall know all that I know, but I would prefer that you should come at the truth by your own efforts, not by my leading you by the hand. We established ourselves on the grassy amal as Poirot had suggested, looking out to sea. Think, my friend, said Poirot's voice encouragingly. Arrange your ideas. Be methodical. Be orderly. There is the secret of success. I endeavored to obey him, casting my mind back over all the details of the case. And suddenly I started as an idea of bewildering luminosity shot into my brain. Tremblingly I built up my hypothesis. You have a little idea, I see, mon ami. Capital. We progress. I sat up, and lit a pipe. Poirot, I said, it seems to me we have been strangely remiss. I say we, although I dare say I would be nearer the mark. But you must pay the penalty of you determined secrecy. So I say again we have been strangely remiss. There is someone we have forgotten. And who is that? Inquired Poirot, with twinkling eyes. Georges Quinault. 20 An amazing statement. The next moment Poirot embraced me warmly on the cheek. Enfin. You have arrived. And all by yourself. It is superb. Continue your reasoning. You are at LT. Decidedly we have done wrong to forget Georges Como. I was so flattered by the little man's approval that I could hardly continue. But at last I collected my thoughts and went on. Georges Como disappeared 20 years ago, but we have no reason to believe that he is dead. Aucuniment, agreed Poirot. Proceed. Therefore we will assume that he is alive. Exactly. Or that he was alive until recently. Demudar and Mua. We will presume, I continued, my enthusiasm rising, that he has fallen on evil days. He has become a criminal, an Apache, a Tranva, what you will. He chances to come to Merlinville. There he finds the woman he has never ceased to love. The sentimentality, warned Poirot. Where one hates one also loves, I quoted or misquoted. At any rate he finds her there, living under an assumed name. But she has a new lover, the Englishman, Renaud. Georges Como, the memory of old wrongs rising in him, quarrels with this Renaud. He lies in wait for him as he comes to visit his mistress, and stabs him in the back. Then, terrified at what he has done, he starts to dig a grave. I imagine it likely that Madame d'Aubreuil comes out to look for her lover. She and Como have a terrible scene. He drags her into the shed, and there suddenly falls down in an epileptic fit. Now supposing Jacques Renaud to appear. Madame d'Aubreuil tells him all, points out to him the dreadful consequences to her daughter if this scandal of the past is revived. His father's murderer is dead, let them do their best to hush it up. Jacques Renaud consents, goes to the house and has an interview with his mother, winning her over to his point of view. Primed with the story that Madame d'Aubreuil has suggested to him, she permits herself to be gagged and bound. There, Poirot, what do you think of that? I leaned back, flushed with the pride of successful reconstruction. Poirot looked at me th01 at one tearfully. I think that you should, tight for the kinema, mon ami, he remarked at last. You mean it would mean a good film, the story that you have recounted to me there, but it bears no sort of resemblance to everyday life. I admit that I haven't gone into all the details, but, you have gone farther, you have ignored them magnificently. What about the way the two men were dressed? Do you suggest that after stabbing his victim, Como removed his suit of clothes, donned it himself, and replaced the dagger? I don't see that that matters, I objected rather huffily. He may have obtained clothes and money from Madame d'Aubreuil by earlier in the day. By you seriously advance that, certainly. He could have to reveal her identity to the Renauds, which would probably have put an end to all hopes of her daughter's marriage. You are wrong, Hastings. He could not blackmail her, for she had the whip hand. Georges Como, remember, is still wanted for murder. A word from her and he is in danger of the guillotine. I was forced, rather reluctantly, to admit the truth of this. Your theory, I remarked acidly, is doubtless correct as to all the details. My theory is the truth, said Poirot quietly. And the truth is necessarily correct. In your theory you made a fundamental error. You permitted your imagination to lead you astray with midnight assignations and passionate love scenes. But in investigating crime we must take our stand upon the commonplace. Shall I demonstrate my methods to you? Oh, by all means let us have a demonstration. Poirot sat very upr at LT and began, wagging his forefinger emphatically to emphasize his points. I will start as you started, from the basic fact of Georges Como. Now the story told by Madame Baroldi in court as to the Russians was admittedly a fabrication. If she was innocent of connivance in the crime, it was concocted by her, and by her only, as she stated. If, on the other hand, she was not innocent, it might have been invented by either her or Georges Como. Now, in this case we are investigating, we meet the same tale. As I pointed out to you, the facts render it very unlikely that Madame d'Aubreuil inspired it. So we turn to the hypothesis that the story had its origin in the brain of Georges Como. Very good. Georges Como, therefore, planned the crime, with Mrs. Renaud as his accomplice. She is in the limelight, and behind her is a shadowy figure whose present alias is unknown to us. Now let us go carefully over the Renaud case from the beginning, setting down each significant point in its chronological order. You have a notebook and pencil? Good. Now what is the earliest point to note down? The letter to you. That was the first we knew of it, but it is not the proper beginning of the case. The first point of any significance, I should say, is the change that came over Monsieur Renaud shortly after arriving in Merlinville, and which is attested to by several witnesses. We have also to consider his friendship with Madame d'Aubruil, and the large sums of money paid over to her. From thence we can come directly to the 23 RD May. Poirot paused, cleared his throat, and signed to me to write, May 23. M. Renaud quarrels with his son over latter's wish to marry Martha d'Aubruil. Son leaves for Paris. May 24. M. Renaud alters his will, leaving entire control of his fortune in his wife's hands. June 7. Quarrel with Trempin Garden, witnessed by Martha d'Aubruil. Letter written to M. Hercule Poirot, imploring assistance. Telegram sent to M. Jacques Renaud, bidding him proceed by the Anzora to Buenos Aires. Chauffeur, Masters, sent off on a holiday. Visit of a lady that evening. As he is seeing her out, his words are yes, yes, but for God's sake go now. Poirot paused. There, Hastings, take each of those facts one by one, consider them carefully by themselves and in relation to the whole, and see if you do not get new light on the matter. I endeavored conscientiously to do as he had said. After a moment or two, I said rather doubtfully, as to the first points, the question seems to be whether we adopt the theory of blackmail, or of an infatuation for this woman. Blackmail, decidedly. You heard what Stoner said as to his character and habits. Mrs. Renaud did not confirm his view, I argued. We have already seen that Madame Renaud's testimony cannot be relied upon in any way. We must trust to Stoner on that point. Still, if Renaud had an affair with a woman called Bella, there seems no inherent improbability in his having another with Madame d'Aubruil. None whatever, I grant you, Hastings. But did he? The letter, Poirot. You forget the letter. No, I do not forget. But what makes you think that letter was written to Monsieur Renaud? Why, it was found in his pocket, and that is all, cut in Poirot. There was no mention of any name to show to whom the letter was addressed. We assumed it was to the dead man because it was in the pocket of his overcoat. Now, mon ami, something about that overcoat struck me as unusual. I measured it, and made the remark that he wore his overcoat very long. That remark should have given you to think. I thought you were just saying it for the sake of saying something, I confessed. Ah, quelle idée. Later you observed me measuring the overcoat of Monsieur Jacques Renaud. Eh bien, Monsieur Jacques Renaud wears his overcoat very short. Put those two facts together with a third, namely, that Monsieur Jacques Renaud flung out of the house in a hurry on his departure for Paris, and tell me what you make of it. I see, I said slowly, as the meaning of Poirot's remarks bore in upon me. That letter was written to Jacques Renaud, not to his father. He caught up the wrong overcoat in his haste and agitation. Poirot nodded. Precisement. We can return to this point later. For the moment let us content ourselves with accepting the letter as having nothing to do with Monsieur Renaud Pera, and pass to the next chronological event. May 23. I read, M. Renaud quarrels with his son over latter's wish to marry Martha d'Aubruil. Son leaves for Paris. I don't see anything much to remark upon there, and the altering of the will the following day seems straightforward enough. It was the direct result of the quarrel. We agree, mon ami, at least as to the cause. But what exact motive underlay this procedure of Monsieur Renaud's? I opened my eyes in surprise. Anger against his son, of course. Yet he wrote him affectionate letters to Paris. So Jacques Renaud says, but he cannot produce them. Well, let us pass from that. Now we come to the day of the tragedy. You have placed the events of the morning in a certain order. Have you any justification for that? I have ascertained that the letter to me was posted at the same time as the telegram was dispatched. Masters was informed he could take a holiday shortly afterwards. In my opinion, the quarrel with the tramp took place anterior to these happenings. I do not see that you can fix that definitely unless you question Madame d'Aubruil. There is no need. I am sure of it. And if you do not see that, you see nothing, Hastings. I looked at him for a moment. Of course. I am an idiot. If Tramp was Georges Como, it was after the stormy interview with him that near Renaud apprehended danger. He sent away the chauffeur, Masters, whom he suspected of being in the other's pay. He wired to his SCU and sent for you. A faint smile crossed Poirot's lips. You do not think it strange that he should use exactly the same expressions in his letter as Madame Renaud used, later in her story? If mention of Santiago was a blind, why should Renaud speak of it, and what is more send his son there? It is puzzling, I admit, but perhaps we shall find some explanation later. We come now to the evening, and the visit of the mysterious lady. I confess that fairly bames me, unless it was indeed Madame d'Aubruil, as Frango Assay all along maintained. Poirot shook his head. My friend, where are your wits wandering? Remember the fragment of check, and the fact that the name Belladievine was faintly familiar to Stoner, and I think we may take it for granted that Belladievine is the hill name of Jack's unknown correspondent, and that it was she who came to the Villa Genevieve that night. Whether she intended to see Jack, or whether she meant all along to appeal to his father, we cannot be certain, but I think we may assume that Ulysse is what occurred. She produced her claim upon Jack, probably showed letters that he had written her, and the older man tried to buy her off by writing a check. This she indignantly tore up. The terms of her letter are those of a woman genuinely in love, and she would probably deeply resent being offered money. In the end he got rid of her, and here the words that he used are significant. Yes, but for God's sake go now, I repeated. They seem to me a little vehement, perhaps, that is all. That is inutile. He was desperately amiss for the girl to go. Why? Not because the interview was unpleasant. No, it was the time that was slipping by, and for some reason time was precious. Why should it be? I asked, bewildered. That is what we ask ourselves. Why should it be? But later we have the incident of the wristwatch, which again shows us that time plays a very important part in the crime. We are now fast approaching the actual drama. It is 10:30 when Belladievine leaves, and by the evidence of the wristwatch we know that the crime was committed, or at any rate that it was staged, before 12 o'clock. We have reviewed all the events anterior to the murder. There remains only one unplaced. By the doctor's evidence, the tramp, when found, had been dead at least 48 hours with a possible margin of 24 hours more. Now, with no other facts to help me than those we have discussed, I place the death as having occurred on the morning of 7th June. I stared at him, stupefied. But how? Why? How can you possibly know? Because only in that way can the sequence of events be logically explained. Mon Amt, I have taken you step by step along the way. Do you not now see what is so glaringly plain? My dear Poirot, I can't see anything glaring about it. I did think I was beginning to see my way before, but I'm now hopelessly fogged. For goodness sake, get on, and tell me who killed Mr. Renaud. That is just what I am not sure of as yet. But you said it was glaringly clear. We talk at cross purposes, my friend. Remember, it is two crimes we are investigating, for which, as I pointed out to you, we have the necessary two bodies. There, n'êtes-vous impatient as pas? I explain all. To begin with, we apply our psychology. We find 3 points at which Monsieur Renaud displays a distinct change of view and action, 3 psychological points therefore. The first occurs immediately after arriving in Merlinville, the second after quarreling with his son on a certain subject, the third on the morning of June 7th. Now for the causes. We can attribute number 1 to meeting Madame d'Aubruil. Number 2 is indirectly connected with her, since it concerns a marriage between Monsieur Renaud's son and her daughter. But the cause of number 3 is hidden from us. We had to deduce it. Now, mon ami, Let me ask you a question, whom do we believe to have planned this crime? Georges Quinault, I said doubtfully, eyeing Poirot warily. Exactly. Now Giroux laid it down as an axiom that a woman lies to save herself, the man she loves, and her child. Since we are satisfied that it was Georges Quinault who dictated the lie to her, and as Georges Quinault is not Jack Renaud, it follows that the third case is put out of court. And, still attributing the crime to Georges Quinault, the first is equally so. So we are forced to the second that Madame Renaud lied for the sake of the man she loved, or in other words, for the sake of Georges Quinault. You agree to that? Yes, I admitted. It seems logical enough. Bien. And Madame Renaud loves Georges Quinault, who, then, is Georges Quinault. The Tran. Have we any evidence to show that Madame Renaud loved the Tranve? No, but very well then. Do not cling to theories where facts no longer support them. Ask yourself instead whom Madame Renaud did love. I shook my head perplexed. Mais oui, you know perfectly. Whom did Madame Renaud love so dearly that when she saw his dead body she fell down in a swoon? I stared dumbfounded. Her husband. I gasped. Poirot nodded. Her husband, or Georges Quinault, whichever you like to call him, I rallied myself. But it's impossible. How impossible? Did we not agree just now that Madame d'Aubreuil was in a position to blackmail Georges Quinault? Yes, but, and did she not very effectively blackmail Monsieur Renaud? That may be true enough, but, and is it not a fact that we know nothing of Monsieur Renaud's youth and upbringing? That he springs suddenly into existence as a French Canadian exactly 22 years, all that is so, I said more firmly, but you seem to me to be overlooking one salient point. What is that, my friend? Why, we have admitted that Georges planned the crime. That brings us to the ridiculous statement that he planned his own murder. Eh bien, mon ami, said Poirot placidly, that is just what he did do. 21 Hercule Poirot on the case. In a measured voice Poirot began his evocation. It seems strange to you, mon ami, that a man should plan his own death? So strange, that you prefer to reject the truth as fantastic, and to revert to a story that is in reality 10 times more impossible. Yes, Monsieur Renaud planned his own death, but there is one detail that perhaps escapes you: he did not intend to die. I shook my head, bewildered. But no, it is almost simple really, said Poirot kindly. For the crime that Monsieur Renaud proposed a murderer was not necessary, as I told you, but a body was. Let us reconstruct, seeing events this time from a different angle. Georges Quinault flies from justice to Canada. There, under an assumed name, he marries, and finally acquires a vast fortune in South America. But there is a nostalgia upon him for his own country. 20 years have elapsed, he is considerably changed in appearance, besides being a man of such eminence that no one is likely to connect him with a fugitive from justice many years ago. He deems it quite safe to return. He takes up his headquarters in England, but intends to spend the summers in France. And ill fortune, or that obscure justice which shapes men's ends and will not allow them to evade the consequences of their acts, takes him to Merlinville. There, in the whole of France, is the one person who is capable of recognizing him. It is, of course, a gold mine to Madame d'Aubreuil, and a gold mine of which she is not slow to take advantage. He is helpless, absolutely in her power. And she bleeds him heavily. And then the inevitable happens. Jack Renaud falls in love with the beautiful girl he sees almost daily, and wishes to marry her. That rouses his father. At all costs, he will prevent his son marrying the daughter of this evil woman. Jack Renaud knows nothing of his father's past, but Madame Renaud knows everything. She is a woman of great force of character and passionately devoted to her husband. They take counsel together. Renaud sees only one way of escape: death. He must appear to die, in reality escaping to another country where he will start again under an assumed name, and where Madame Renaud, having played the widow's part for a while, can join him. It is essential that she should have control of the money, so he alters his will. How they meant to manage the body business originally, I do not know. Possibly an art student's skeleton in a fire or something of the kind, but long before their plans have matured an event occurs which plays into their hands. A rough tramp, violent and abusive, finds his way into the garden. There is a struggle, Renaud seeks to eject him, and suddenly the tramp, an epileptic, falls down in a fit. He is dead. Renaud calls his wife. Together they drag him into the shed as we know the event had occurred just outside and they realize the marvelous opportunity that has been vouchsafed them. The man bears no resemblance to Renaud but he is middle-aged, of a usual French type. That is sufficient. I rather fancy that they sat on the bench up there, out of earshot from the house, discussing matters. Their plan was quickly made. The identification must rest solely on Madame Renaud's evidence. Jack Renaud and the chauffeur, who had been with his master 2 years, must be got out of the way. It was unlikely that the French women servants would go near the body, and in any case Renaud intended to take measures to deceive anyone not likely to appreciate details. Masters was sent off, a telegram dispatched to Jack, Buenos Aires being selected to give credence to the story that Renaud had decided upon. Having heard of me as a rather obscure elderly detective, he wrote his appeal for help, avowing that when I arrived, the production of the letter would have a profound effect upon the examining magistrate which, of course, it did. They dressed the body of the tramp in a suit of Renaud's and left his ragged coat and trousers by the door of the shed, not daring to take them into the house. And then, to give credence to the tale Madame Renaud was to tell, they drove the aeroplane dagger through his heart. That night Renaud will first bind and gag his wife, and then, taking a spade, will dig a grave in that particular plot of ground where he knows how do you call it? Bunker? Is to be made. It is essential that the body should be found. Madame d'Abreuil must have no suspicions. On the other hand, if a little time elapses, any dangers as to identity will be greatly lessened. Then, Renaud will don the tramp's rags, and shum off to the station, where he will leave, unnoticed, by the 12:10 train. Since the crime will be supposed to have taken place 2 hours later, no suspicion can possibly attach to him. You see now his annoyance at the inopportune visit of the girl, Bella. Every moment of delay is fatal to his plans. He gets rid of her as soon as he can, however. Then, to work. He leaves the front door slightly ajar to create the impression that assassins left that way. He binds and gags Madame Renaud, correcting his mistake of 22 years ago, when the looseness of the bonds caused suspicion to fall upon his accomplice, but leaving her primed with essentially the same story as he had invented before, proving the unconscious recoil of the mind against originality. The night is chilly, and he slips on an overcoat over his underclothing, intending to cast it into the grave with the dead man. He goes out by the window, smoothing over the flower bed carefully, and thereby furnishing the most positive evidence against himself. He goes out onto the lonely golf links, and he digs and then, said Poirot gravely, the justice that he has so long eluded overtakes him. An unknown hand stabs him in the back. Now, Hastings, you understand what I mean when I talk of 2 crimes. The first crime, the crime that Monsieur Renaud, in his arrogance, asked us to investigate, is solved. But behind it lies a deeper riddle. And to solve that will be difficult since the criminal, in his wisdom, has been content to avail himself of the devices prepared by Renaud. It has been a particularly perplexing and baffling mystery to solve. You're marvelous, Poirot, I said, with admiration. Absolutely marvelous. No one on earth but you would have done it. I think my praise pleased him. For once in his life he looked almost embarrassed. That poor Giroux, said Poirot, trying unsuccessfully to look modest. Without doubt he is not all stupidity. He has had la mauvaise chance once or twice. That dark hair coiled round the dagger, for instance. To say the least, it was misleading. To tell you the truth, Poirot, I said slowly, even now I don't quite see whose hair was it. Madame Renaud's, of course. That is where la mauvaise chance came in. Her hair, dark originally, is almost completely silvered. It might just as easily have been a grey hair, and then, by no conceivable effort could Giroux have persuaded himself it came from the head of Jack Renaud. But it is all of a piece. Always the facts must be twisted to fit the theory. Without doubt, when Madame Renaud recovers, she will speak. The possibility of her son being accused of the murder never occurred to her. How should it, when she believed him safely at sea on board the Anzora? Ah! Voilà un effame, Hastings. What force, what self-command! She only made one slip. On his unexpected return, it does not matter now. And no one noticed, no one realized the significance of those words. What a terrible part she has had to play, poor woman. Imagine the shock when she goes to identify the body and, instead of what she expects, sees the actual lifeless form of the husband she has believed miles away by now. No wonder she fainted. But since then, despite her grief and her despair, how resolutely she has played her part and how the anguish of it must wring her. She cannot say a word to set us on the track of the real murderers. For her son's sake, no one must know that Paul Renaud was Georges Como, the criminal. Final and most bitter blow, she has admitted publicly that Madame d'Aubruil was her husband's mistress, for a hint of blackmail might be fatal to her secret. How cleverly she dealt with the examining magistrate when he asked her if there was any mystery in her husband's past life. Nothing so romantic, I am sure, monsieur. It was perfect, the indulgent tone, the soupçon of said mockery. At once Monsieur Hotet felt himself foolish and melodramatic. Yes, she is a great woman. If she loved a criminal, she loved him royally. Poirot lost himself in contemplation. One thing more, Poirot, what about the piece of lead piping? You do not see? To disfigure the victim's face so that it would be unrecognizable. It was that which first set me on the right track. And that imbecile of a Giroux, swarming all over it to look for match ends. Did I not tell you that a clue of 2 foot long was quite as good as a clue of 2 inches? You see, Hastings, we must now start again. Who killed Monsieur Renaud? Someone who was near the villa just before 12 o'clock that night, someone who would benefit by his death. The description fits Jacques Renaud only too well. The crime need not have been premeditated. And then the dagger. I started, I had not realized that point. Of course, I said, Mrs. Renaud's dagger was the second one we found in the tramp. There were 2, then. Certainly, and since they were duplicates, it stands to reason that Jacques Renaud was the owner. But that would not trouble me so much. In fact, I had a little idea as to that. No, the worst indictment against him is again psychological heredity, mon ami, heredity. Like father, like son, Jacques Renaud, when all is said or done, is the son of Georges Como. His tone was grave and earnest, and I was impressed in spite of myself. What is your little idea that you mentioned just now? I asked. For answer, Poirot consulted his turnip-faced watch, and then asked, what time is the afternoon boat from Calais? About 5, I believe. That will do very well. We shall just have time. You are going to England? Yes, my friend. To find a possible witness. Who? With a rather peculiar smile upon his face, Poirot replied, Miss Belladivine. But how will you find her? What do you know about her? I know nothing about her, but I can guess a good deal. We may take it for granted that her name is Belladivine, and since that name was faintly familiar to Monsieur Stoner, though evidently not in connection with the Renaud family, it is probable that she is on the stage. Jacques Renaud was a young man with plenty of money, and 20 years of age. The stage is sure to have been the home of his first love. It tallies, too, with Monsieur Renaud's attempt to placate her with a check. I think I shall find her all right, especially with the help of this. And he brought out the photograph I had seen him take from Jacques Renaud's drawer. With love from Bella was scrawled across the corner, but it was not that which held my eyes fascinated. The likeness was not first-rate, but for all that it was unmistakable to me. I felt a cold sinking, as though some unutterable calamity had befallen me. It was the face of Cinderella. To one find love. For a moment or two I sat as though frozen, the photograph still in my hand. Then summoning all my courage to appear unmoved, I handed it back. At the same time I stole a quick glance at Poirot. Had he noticed anything? But to my relief he did not seem to be observing me. Anything unusual in my manner had certainly escaped him. He rose briskly to his feet. We have no time to lose. We must make our departure with all dispatch. All is well, the sea it will be calm. In the bustle of departure, I had no time for thinking, but once on board the boat, secure from Poirot's observation, I pulled myself together, and attacked the facts dispassionately. How much did Poirot know, and why was he bent on finding this girl? Did he suspect her of having seen Jack Renaud commit the crime? Or did he suspect, but that was impossible? The girl had no grudge against the elder Renaud, no possible motive for wishing his death. What had brought her back to the scene of the murder? I went over the facts carefully. She must have left the train at Calais, where I parted from her that day. No wonder I had been unable to find her on the boat. If she had dined in Calais, and then taken a train out to Merlinville, she would have arrived at the Villa Genevieve just about the time that Francois said. What had she done when she left the house just after 10? Presumably either gone to an hotel, or returned to Calais. And then? The crime had been committed on Tuesday night. On Thursday morning she was once more in Merlinville. Had she ever left France at all? I doubted it very much. What kept her there? The hope of seeing Jack Renaud. I had told her, as at the time we believed, that he was on the high seas en route to Buenos Aires. Possibly she was aware that the Anzora had not sailed. But to know that she must have seen Jack. Was that what Poirot was after? Had Jack Renaud, returning to see Martha d'Aubruil, come face to face instead with Bella Duveen, the girl he had heartlessly thrown over? I began to see daylight. If that were indeed the case, it might furnish Jack with the alibi he needed. Yet under those circumstances his silence seemed difficult to explain. Why could he not have spoken out boldly? Did he fear for this former entanglement of his to come to the ears of Enlith d'Aubruil? I shook my head, dissatisfied. The thing had been harmless inouï, a foolish boy and girl affair, and I reflected cynically that the son of a millionaire was not likely to be over by a penniless French girl, who moreover loved him devotedly, without a much graver cause. Poirot reappeared brisk and smiling at Dover, and our journey to London was uneventful. It was past 9 o'clock when we arrived, and I supposed that we should return straight away to our rooms and do nothing till the morning. But Poirot had other plans. We must lose no time, mon ami. The news of the arrest will not be in the English papers until the day after tomorrow, but still we must lose no time. I did not quite follow his reasoning, but I merely asked how he proposed to find the girl. You remember Joseph Aarons, the theatrical agent? No? I assisted him in a little matter of a Japanese wrestler. A pretty little problem. I must recount it to you one day. He, without doubt, will be able to put us in the way of finding out what we want to know. It took us some time to run near Aarons to earth, and it was after midnight when we finally managed it. He greeted Poirot with every evidence of warmth, and professed himself ready to be of service to us in any way. There's not much about the profession I don't know, he said, beaming genially. Eh bien, Monsieur Aarons, I desire to find a young girl called Bella Duveen, Yaveen. I know the name, but for a moment I can't place it. That's her line. That I do not know, but here is her photograph. Near. Aarons studied it for a moment, then his face lighted. Got it. He slapped his thigh. The Dulcibella kids, by the Lord. The Dulcibella kids. That's it. They're sisters. Acrobats, dancers, and singers. Give quite a good little ton there in the provinces, somewhere, I believe, if they're not resting. They've been on in Paris for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Can you find out for me exactly where they are? Easy as a bird. You go home, and I'll send you round the dope in the morning. With this promise we took leave of him. He was as good as his word. About 11 o'clock the following day, a scribbled note reached us. The Dulcibella sisters are on at the palace in Coventry. Good luck to you. Without more ado, we started for Coventry. Poirot made no inquiries at the theatre, but contented himself with booking stalls for the variety performance that evening. The show was wearisome beyond words, or perhaps it was only my mood that made it seem so. Japanese families balanced themselves precariously, would-be fashionable men, in greenish evening dress and exquisitely slicked hair, reeled off society patter and danced marvelously. Stout prima donnas sang at the top of the human register, a comic comedian endeavored to be near George Robey and failed signally. At last the number went up which announced the Dulcibella Kids. My heart beat sickeningly. There she was, there they both were, the pair of them, one flaxen-haired, one dark, matching as to size, with short fluffy skirts and immense buster brown bows. They looked a pair of extremely piquant children. They began to sing. Their voices were fresh and true, rather thin and musically, but attractive. It was quite a pretty little turn. They danced neatly, and did some clever little acrobatic feats. The words of their songs were crisp and catchy. When the curtain fell, there was all meed of applause. Evidently the Dulcibella Kids were a success. Suddenly I felt that I could remain no longer. I must get out into the air. I suggested leaving to Poirot. Go by all means, mon ami. I amuse myself, and will stay to the end. I will rejoin you later. It was only a few steps from the theater to the hotel. I went up to the sitting room, ordered a whiskey and soda, and sat drinking it, staring meditatively into the empty grate. I heard the door open, and turned my head, thinking it was Poirot. Then I jumped to my feet. It was Cinderella who stood in the doorway. She spoke haltingly, her breath coming in little gasps. I saw you in front. You and your friend. When you got up to go, I was waiting outside and followed you. Are you here in Coventry? What were you doing there tonight? Is the man who was with you the detective? She stood there, the cloak she had wrapped round her stage dress slipping from her shoulders. I saw the whiteness of her cheeks under the rouge, and heard the terror in her voice. And in that moment I understood everything, understood why Poirot was seeking her, and what she feared, and understood at last my own heart. Yes, I said gently. Is he looking for me? She half whispered. Then, as I did not answer for a moment, she slipped down by the big chair, and burst into violent bitter weeping. I knelt down by her, holding her in my arms, and smoothing the hair back from her face. Don't cry, child, don't cry, for God's sake. You're safe here. I'll take care of you. Don't cry, darling. Don't cry. I know everything. Oh, but you don't. I think I do. And after a moment, as her sobs grew quieter, I asked, it was you who took the dagger, wasn't it? Yes. That was why you wanted me to show you round? And why you pretended to faint? Again she nodded. Why did you take the dagger? I asked presently. She replied as simply as a child. I was afraid there might be finger marks on it. But didn't you remember that you had worn gloves? She shook her head as though bewildered, and then said slowly, are you going to give me up to the police? Good God! No. Her eyes sought mine long and earnestly, and then she asked in a little quiet voice that sounded afraid of itself, why not? It seemed a strange place and a strange time for a declaration of love, and God knows, in all my imagining, I had never pictured love coming to me in such a guise. But I answered certainly and naturally enal at el, because I love you, Cinderella. She bent her head down, as though ashamed, and muttered in a broken voice, you can't not if you knew, and then, as though rallying herself, she faced me squarely, and asked, what do you know, then? I know that you came to see Mr. Renauld that night. He offered you a check and you tore it up indignantly. Then you left the house. I paused. Go on, what next? I don't know whether you knew Jack Renauld would be coming that night, or whether you just waited about on the chance of seeing him, but you did wait about. Perhaps you were just miserable and walked aimlessly, but at any rate just before 12 you were still near there, and you saw a man on the golf links again. I paused. I had leapt to the truth in a flash as she entered the room, but now the picture rose before me even more convincingly. I saw vividly the peculiar pattern of the overcoat on the dead body of Mr. Renauld, and I remembered the amazing likeness that had startled me into believing for one instant that the dead man had risen from the dead when his son burst into our conclave in the salon. Go on, repeated the girl steadily. I fancy his back was to you, but you recognized him, Or thought you recognized him. The gate and the carriage were familiar to you, and the pattern of his overcoat. I paused. You used to tell and eat in one of your letters to Jack Reinald. When you saw him there, your anger and jealousy drove you mad and you struck. I don't believe for a minute that you meant to kill him, but you did kill him, Cinderella. She had flung up her hands to cover her face, and in a choked voice she said, "You're RAT. You're RAT. I can see it all as you tell it." Then she tuned on me almost savagely. "And you love me? Knowing what you do, how can you love me?" "I don't, Clow," I said a little wearily. "I fluink love is like that, a thing one cannot help. I have tried, I know, ever since the first day I met you, and love has been too strong for me." And then suddenly, when I least expected it, she broke down again, casting herself down on the floor and sobbing wildly. "Oh, I can't," she cried. "I don't know what to do. I don't know which way to turn. Oh, pity me, someone, and tell me what to do." Again I knelt by her, soothing her as best I could. "Don't be afraid of me, Bella. For God's sake, don't be afraid of me. I love you, that's true, but I don't want anything in return. Only let me help you love him still if you have to, but let me help you, as he can't." It was as though she had been turned to stone by my words. She raised her head from her hands and stared at me. "You think that," she whispered. "You fluink that I love Jack Reinald." Then, half laughing, half crying, she flung her arms passionately round my neck, and pressed her sweet wet face to mine. "Not as I love you," she whispered. "Never as I love you." Her lips brushed my cheek, and then, seeking my mouth, kissed me again and again with a sweetness and fire beyond belief. The wildness of it and the wonder, I shall not forget, no, not as long as I live. It was a sound in the doorway that made us look up. Poirot was standing there looking at us. I did not hesitate. With a bound I reached him and pinioned his arms to his sides. "Quick," I said to the girl. "Get out of here. As fast as you can." I'll hold him. With one look at me, she fled out of the room past us. I held Poirot in a grip of iron. "Mon ami," observed the latter mildly, "you do this sort of thing very well. The strong man holds me in his grasp and I am helpless as a child. But all this is uncomfortable and slightly ridiculous. Let us sit down and be calm. You won't pursue her?" "Mon Dieu! No. Am I Giroux? Release me, my friend." Keeping a suspicious eye upon him, for I paid Poirot the convenience of knowing that I was no match for him in astuteness, I relaxed my grip, and he sank into an armchair, feeling his arms tenderly. "It is that you have the strength of a bull when you are roused, Hastings. Eh bien, and do you think you have behaved well to your old friend? I show you the girl's photograph and you recognize it, but you never say a word." "There was no need if you knew that I recognized it," I said rather bitterly. So Poirot had known all along. I had not deceived him for an instant. "Ta-ta. You did not know that I knew that. And tonight you help the girl to escape when we have found her with so much trouble. Eh bien. It comes to this: are you going to work with me or against me, Hastings?" For a moment or two I did not answer. To break with my old friend gave me great pain, yet I must definitely range myself against him. Would he ever forgive me, I wondered? He had been strangely calm so far, but I knew him to possess marvelous self-command. "Poirot," I said, "I'm sorry. I admit I've behaved badly to you over this. But sometimes one has no choice. And in future I must take my own line." Poirot nodded his head several times. "I understand," he said. The mocking light had quite died out of his eyes, and he spoke with a sincerity and kindness that surprised me. "It is that, my friend, is it not? It is love that has come, not as you imagined it, all cock a hoop with fine feathers, but sadly, with bleeding feet. Well, I warned you. When I realized that this girl must have taken the danger, I warned you. Perhaps you remember. But already it was too late. But, tell me, how much do you know?" I met his eyes squarely. "Nothing that you could tell me would be any surprise to me, Poirot. Understand that. But in case you think of resuming your search for Miss Devine, I should like you to know one thing clearly. If you have any idea that she was concerned in the crime, or was the mysterious lady who called upon near Renaud that night, you are wrong. I traveled home from France with her that day, and parted from her at Victoria that evening, so that it is clearly impossible for her to have been in Merlinville. Ah! Poirot looked at me thou and Lly. And you would swear to that in a court of, most certainly I would. Poirot rose and bowed. Mon ami. Vive amour. It can perform miracles. It is decidedly ingenious what you have thought of there. It defeats even Hercule Poirot. Twentytlnwe difficulties ahead. After a moment of stress, such as I have just described, reaction is bound to set in. I retired to rest that night on a note of triumph, but I awoke to realize that I was by no means out of the wood. True, I could see no flaw in the alibi I had so suddenly conceived. I had but to stick to my story, and I failed to see how Bella could be convicted in face of it. But I felt the need of treading warily. Poirot would not take defeat lying down somehow or other. He would endeavor to turn the tables on me, and that in the way, and at the moment, when I least expected it. We met at breakfast the following morning as though nothing had happened. Poirot's good temper was imperturbable, yet I thought I detected a film of reserve in his manner which was new. After breakfast, I announced my intention of going out for a stroll. A malicious gleam shot Poirot's eyes. If it is information you seek, you need not be at the pains of deranging yourself. I can tell you all you wish to know. The Dulcibella sisters have cancelled their contract, and have left Coventry for an unknown destination. Is that really so, Poirot? You can take it from me, Hastings. I made inquiries the first thing this morning. After all, what else did you expect? True inuit, nothing else could be expected under the circumstances. Cinderella had profited by the slight start I had been able to secure her, and would certainly not lose a moment in removing herself from the reach of the pursuer. It was what I had intended and planned. Nevertheless, I was aware of being plunged into a network of fresh difficulties. I had absolutely no means of communicating with the girl, and it was vital that she should know the line of defense that had occurred to me, and which I was prepared to carry out. Of course it was possible that she might try to send word to me in some way or another, but I hardly thought it likely. She would imo the risk she ran of a message being intercepted by Poirot, thus setting him on her track once more. Clearly her only course was to disappear utterly for the time being. But, in the meantime, what was Poirot doing? I studied him attentively. He was wearing his most innocent air, and staring meditatively into the far distance. He looked altogether too placid and supine to give me reassurance. I had learned, with Poirot, that the less dangerous he looked, the more dangerous he was. His quiescence alarmed me. Observing a troubled quality in my glance, he smiled benignantly. You are puzzled, Hastings. You ask yourself why I do not launch myself in pursuit. Well, something of the kind. It is what you would do, were you in my place. I understand that. But I am not of those who enjoy rushing up and down a country seeking a needle in a haystack, as you English say. No, let Mademoiselle Bella Devine go. Without doubt, I shall be able to find her when the time comes. Until then, I am content to wait. I stared at him doubtfully. Was he seeking to mislead me? I had an irritating feeling that, even now, he was master of the situation. My sense of superiority was gradually waning. I had contrived the girl's escape, and evolved a brilliant scheme for saving her from the consequences of her rash act, but I could not rest easy in my mind. Poirot's perfect calm awakened 1,000 apprehensions. I suppose, Poirot, I said rather diffidently, I mustn't ask what your plans are? I've forfeited the R@LT. But not at all. There is no secret about them. We return to France without delay. Precisely we. You know very well that you cannot afford to let Papa Poirot out of your S@LT, eh? Is it not so, my friend? But remain in England by all means if you wish. I shook my head. He had hit the nail on the head. I could not afford to let him out of my s at lt, although at l I could not expect his confidence after what had happened. I could still check his actions. The only danger to Bella lay with him. Giroux and the French police were indifferent to her existence. At all costs I must keep near Poirot. Poirot observed me attentively as these reflections passed through my mind, and gave me a nod of satisfaction. I am right, am I not? And as you are quite capable of trying to follow me, disguised with some absurdity such as a false beard which everyone would perceive, bien entendu, I much prefer that we should voyage together. It would annoy me greatly that anyone should mock themselves at you. Very well, then. But it's only fair to warn you. I know all. You are my enemy. Be my enemy, then it does not worry me at all. So long as it's all fair and above board, I don't mind. You have to the full the English passion for fair play. Now your scruples are satisfied, let us depart immediately. There is no time to be lost. Our stay in England has been short but sufficient. I know what I wanted to know. The tone was light, but I read a veiled menace into the words. Still I began, and stopped. Still, as you say. Without doubt you are satisfied with the part you are playing. Me, I preoccupy myself with Jack Reinald. Jack Reinald. The words gave me a start. I had conveniently forgotten that aspect of the case. Jack Reinald, in prison, with the shadow of the guillotine looming over him. I saw the part I was playing in a more sinister light. I could save Bella, yes, but in doing so I ran the risk of sending an innocent man to his death. I pushed the thought from me with horror. It could not be. He would be acquitted. Certainly he would be acquitted. But the cold fear came back. Suppose he were not? What then? Could I have it on my conscience? Horrible thought. Would it come to that in the end? A decision. Bella or Jack Reinald. The promptings of me heart were to save the girl I loved at any cost to myself. But, if the cost were to another, the problem was altered. What would the girl herself say? I remembered that no word of Jack Reinald's arrest had passed my lips. As yet she was in total ignorance of the fact that her former lover was in prison charged with a hideous crime which he had not committed. When she knew, how would she act? Would she permit her life to be saved at the expense of his? Certainly she must do nothing rash. Jack Reinald might, and probably would, be acquitted without any intervention on her part. If so, good. But if he was not? That was the terrible, the unanswerable problem. I fancied that she ran no risk of the extreme penalty. The circumstances of the crime were quite different in her case. She could plead jealousy and extreme provocation, and her youth and beauty would go for much. The fact that by a tragic mistake it was Mr. Reinald, and not his son, who paid the penalty would not alter the motive of the crime. But in any case, however lenient the sentence of the court, it must mean a long term of imprisonment. No, Bella must be protected. And, at the same time, Jack Reinald must be saved. How this was to be accomplished I did not see clearly. But I pinned my faith to Poirot. He knew. Come what might, he would manage to save an innocent man. He must find some pretext other than the real one. It might be difficult, but he would manage it somehow. And with Bella unsuspected, and Jack Reinald acquitted, all would end satisfactorily. So I told myself repeatedly, but at the bottom of me heart there still remained a cold fear. 24. Save him. We crossed from England by the evening boat, and the following morning saw us in St. Omer, whither Jack Reinald had been taken. Poirot lost no time in visiting M'Hotet. As he did not seem disposed to make any objections to my accompanying him, I bore him Cornpanny. After various formalities and preliminaries, we were conducted to the examining magistrate's room. He greeted us cordially. I was told that you had returned to England, Monsieur Poirot. I am glad to find that such is not the case. It is true I went there, monsieur, but it was only for a flying visit. A side issue, but one that I fancied might repay investigation. And it did. Poirot shrugged his shoulders. M'Hotet nodded, sighing. We must resign ourselves, I fear. That animal Giroux, his manners are abominable, but he is undoubtedly clever. Not much chance of that one making a mistake. You think not? It was the exam_LNG magistrate's turn to shrug his shoulders. Oh, well, speaking frankly in confidence, have you come to any other conclusion? Frankly, there seem to me to be many points that are obscure. Such as underscore. But Poirot was not to be drawn. I have not yet tabulated them, he remarked. It was a general reflection that I was making. I liked the young man, and should be sorry to believe him guilty of such a hideous crime. By the way, what has he to say for himself on the matter? The magistrate frowned. I cannot understand him. He seems incapable of putting up any sort of defense. It has been most difficult to get him to answer questions. He contents himself with a general denial, and beyond that takes refuge in a most obstinate silence. I am interrogating him again tomorrow. Perhaps you would like to be present. We accepted the invitation with empressement. A distressing case, said the magistrate with a sigh. My sympathy for Madame Renaud is profound. How is Madame Renaud? She has not yet recovered consciousness. It is merciful in a way, poor woman, she is being spared much. The doctors say that there is no danger, but that when she comes to herself she must be kept as quiet as possible. It was, I understand, quite as much the shock as the fall which caused her present state. It would be terrible if her brain became unhinged, but I should not wonder at all. No, really, not at all. Imhotep leaned back, shaking his head, with a sort of mournful enjoyment, as he envisaged the gloomy prospect. He roused himself at length, and observed with a start, that reminds me. I have here a letter for you, Monsieur Poirot. Let me see. Where did I put it? He proceeded to rummage among his papers. At last he found the missive, and handed it to Poirot. It was sent under cover to me in order that I might forward it to you, he explained. But as you left no address I could not do so. Poirot studied the letter curiously. It was addressed in a long, sloping, foreign hand, and the writing was decidedly a woman's. Poirot did not open it. Instead he put it in his pocket and rose to his feet. Till tomorrow then. And Lanny, thanks for your courtesy and amiability. But not at all. I am always at your service. We were just leaving the building when we came face to face with Giroux, looking more dandified than ever, and thoroughly pleased with himself. Aha! Monsieur Poirot, he cried airily. You have returned from England then. As you see, said Poirot. The end of the case is not far off now, I fancy. I agree with you, Monsieur Giroux. Poirot spoke in a subdued tone. His crestfallen manner seemed to delight the other. Of all the milk and water criminals. Not an idea of defending himself. It is extraordinary. So extraordinary that it gives one to think, does it not, suggested Poirot mildly. But Giroux was not even listening. He twirled his cane amicably. Well, good day, Monsieur Poirot. I am glad you're satisfied of young Renaud's guilt at last. Pardon. But I am not in the least satisfied. Jack Renaud is innocent. Giroux stared for a moment, then burst out laughing, tapping his head significantly with the brief remark, took. Poirot drew himself up. A dangerous light showed in his eyes. Monsieur Giroux, the case your manner to me has been deliberately insulting. You need teaching a lesson. I am prepared to wager you 500 francs that I find the murderer of Monsieur Renaud before you do. Is it agreed? Giroux stared helplessly at him, and murmured again, took. Come now, urged Poirot, is it agreed? I have no wish to take your money from you. Make your mind easy, you will not. Oh, well then, I agree. You speak off me manner to you being insulting. Well, once, or twice, your manner has annoyed me. I am enchanted to hear it, said Poirot. Good morning, Monsieur Giroux. Come, Hastings. I said no word as we walked along the street. My heart was heavy. Poirot had displayed his intentions only too plainly. I doubted more than ever my powers of saving Bella from the consequences of her act. This unlucky encounter with Giroux had roused Poirot and put him on his mettle. Suddenly I felt a hand laid on my shoulder, and turned to face Gabriel Stoner. We stopped and greeted him, and he proposed strolling with us back to our hotel. "And what are you doing here, Monsieur Stoner?" inquired Poirot. "One must stand by one's friends," replied the other dryly. "Especially when they are unjustly accused." "Then you do not believe that Jack Renaud committed the crime?" I asked eagerly. "Certainly I don't. I know the lad. I admit that there have been one or two things in this business that have staggered me completely, but nonetheless, in spite of his fool way of taking it, I'll never believe that Jack Renaud is a murderer." My heart warmed to the secretary. His words seemed to lift a secret weight from my heart. "I have no doubt that many people feel as you do," I exclaimed. "There is really absurdly little evidence against him. I should say that there was no doubt of his acquittal, no doubt whatever." But Stoner hardly responded as I could have wished. "I'd give a lot to think as you do," he said gravely. He turned to Poirot. "What's your opinion, monsieur?" "I think that things look very black against Hero," said Poirot quietly. "You believe him guilty?" said Stoner sharply. "No. But I think he will find it hard to prove his innocence." "He's behaving so demmed queerly," muttered Stoner. "Of course, I realize that there's a lot more in this affair than meets the eye. Giroux's not wise to that because he's an outsider, but the whole thing has been demmed odd. As to that, least said soonest mended. If Mrs. Renaud wants to hush anything up, I'll take my cue from her. It's her show, and I've too much respect for her judgment to shove my oar in, but I can't get behind this attitude of Jack, as anyone would think he wanted to be thought guilty. But it's absurd," I cried, bursting in. "For one thing, the dagger." I paused, uncertain as to how much Poirot would wish me to reveal. I continued, choosing my words carefully, "We know that the dagger could not have been in Jack Renaud's possession that evening. Mrs. Renaud knows that." "True," said Stoner. "She recovers, she will doubtless say all this and more. Well, I must be leaving you." "One moment." Poirot's hand arrested his departure. "Can you arrange for word to be sent to me at once should Mrs. Renaud recover consciousness?" "Certainly. That's easily done." "That point about the dagger is good, Poirot," I urged as we went upstairs. I couldn't speak very plainly before Stoner. "That was quite right of you. We might as well keep the knowledge to ourselves as long as we can. As to the dagger, your point hardly helps Jack Renaud. You remember that I was absent for an hour this morning, before we started from London." "Yes, well, I was employed in trying to find the firm Jack Renaud employed to convert his souvenirs. It was not very difficult. Eh bien, Hastings, they made to his order not 2 paper clavies, but 3. So that, after giving one to his mother and one to Bella Diavine, there was a third which he doubtless retained for his own use. No, Hastings, I fear the dagger question will not help us to save him from the guillotine." "It won't come to that," I cried, stung. Poirot shook his head uncertainly. "You will save him," I cried positively. Poirot glanced at me dryly. "Have you not rendered it impossible, mon ami?" "Some other way," I muttered. "Ah! Sapristi! But it is miracles you ask from me. No, say no more. Let us instead see what is in this letter." And he drew out the envelope from his breast pocket. His face contracted as he read, then he handed the one flimsy sheet to me. "There are other women in the world who suffer, Hastings." The writing was blurred and the note had evidently been written in great agitation. "Dear M. Poirot, if you get this, I beg of you to come to no aid. I have no one to turn to, and at all costs Jack must be saved. I implore of you on no knees to help Martha D'Abreuil." I handed it back, moved. "You will go at once. We will command an auto." Half an hour later saw us at the Villa Marguerite. Martha was at the door to meet us, and let Poirot in, clinging with both hands to one of his. "Ah, you have come, it is good of you. I have been in despair, not knowing what to do. They will not let me go to see him in prison even. I suffer horribly. I am nearly mad. Is it true what they say, that he does not deny the crime? But that is madness. It is impossible that he should have done it. Never for 1 minute will I believe it. Neither do I believe it, mademoiselle, said Poirot gently. But then why does he not speak? I do not understand. Perhaps because he is screening someone, suggested Poirot, watching her. Enlerth frowned. Screening someone? Do you mean his mother? Ah, from the beginning I have suspected her. Who inherits all that vast fortune? She does. It is easy to wear widow's weeds and play the hypocrite. And they say that when he was arrested she fell down like that. She made a dramatic gesture. And without doubt, Monsieur Stoner, the secretary, he helped her. They are thick as thieves, those two. It is true she is older than he, but what do men care if a woman is rich? There was a hint of bitterness in her tone. Stoner was in England, I put in. He says so, but who knows? And mademoiselle, said Poirot quietly, if we are to work together, you and I, we must have things clear. First, I will ask you a question. Yes, monsieur. Are you aware of your mother's real name? Martha looked at him for a minute, then, letting her head fall forward on her arms, she burst into tears. There, said Poirot, patting her on the shoulder. Calm yourself, petite, I see that you know. Now a second question, did you know who Monsieur Renaud was? Monsieur Renaud, she raised her head from her hands and gazed at him wonderingly. Ah, I see you do not know that. Now listen to me carefully. Step by step, he went over the case, much as he had done to me on the day of our departure for England. Martha listened spellbound. When he had finished, she drew a long breath. But you are wonderful, magnificent. You are the greatest detective in the world. With a swift gesture she slipped off her chair and knelt before him with an abandonment that was wholly French. Save him, monsieur, she cried. I love him so. Oh, save him, save him, save him. 25 and denouement. We were present the following morning at the examination of Jacques Renaud. Short as the time had been, I was shocked at the change that had taken place in the young prisoner. His cheeks had fallen in, there were deep black circles round his eyes, and he looked haggard and distraught, as one who had wooed sleep in vain for several nights. He betrayed no emotion at seeing us. Renaud, began the magistrate, do you deny that you were in Merlinville on the night of the crime? Jack did not reply at once, then he said with a hesitancy of manner which was piteous, I told you that I was in Cherbourg. The magistrate turned sharply. Send in the station witnesses. In a moment or two the door opened to admit a man whom I recognized as being a porter at Merlinville station. You were on duty on the night of 7th June. Yes, monsieur. You witnessed the arrival of the 11 train. Yes, monsieur. Look at the prisoner. Do you recognize him as having been one of the passengers to Lt? Yes, monsieur. There is no possibility of your being mistaken. No, monsieur. I know Monsieur Jacques Renaud well. Nor if I owe your being mistaken as to the date. No, monsieur. Because it was the following morning, June 8th, that we heard of the murder. Another railway official was brought in, and confirmed the first one's evidence. The magistrate looked at Jacques Renaud. These men have identified you positively. What have you to say? Jack shrugged his shoulders. Nothing. Renaud, continued the magistrate, do you recognize this? He took something from the table by his side and held it out to the prisoner. I shuddered as I recognized the aeroplane dagger. Pardon, cried Jack's counsel, en lettre grossière. I demand to speak to my client before he answers that question. But Jacques Renaud had no consideration for the feelings of the wretched grossière. He waved him aside, and replied quietly, certainly I recognize it. It was a present given by me to my mother, as a souvenir of the war. Is there, as far as you know, any duplicate of that dagger in existence? Again en lettre grossière burst out, and again Jack overrode him. Not that I know of. The setting was my own design. Even the magistrate almost gasped at the boldness of the reply. It did, in very truth, seem as though at once Jack was rushing on his fate. I realized, of course, the vital necessity he was under of concealing, for Bella's sake, the fact that there was a duplicate dagger in the case. So long as there was supposed to be only one weapon, no suspicion was likely to attach to the girl who had had the second paper knife in her possession. He was valiantly shielding the woman he had once loved, but at what cost to himself? I began to realize the magnitude of the task I had so lightly set Poirot. It would not be easy to secure the acquittal of Jack Renaud by anything short of the truth. Imhotep spoke again, with a peculiarly biting inflection. Madame Renaud told us that this dagger was on her dressing table on the night of the crime. But Madame Renaud is a mother. It will doubtless astonish you, Renaud, but I consider it highly likely that Madame Renaud was mistaken, and that, by inadvertence perhaps, you had taken it with you to Paris. Doubtless you will contradict me. I saw the lad's handcuffed hands clench themselves. The perspiration stood out in beads upon his brow, as with a supreme effort he interrupted Imhotep in a hoarse voice, I shall not contradict you. It is possible. It was a stupefying moment. The Lettre Grossier rose to his feet, protesting, my client has undergone a considerable nervous strain. I should wish it put on record that I do not consider him answerable for what he says. The magistrate quelled him angrily. For a moment a doubt seemed to arise in his own mind. Jack Renaud had almost overdone his part. He leaned forward, and gazed at the prisoner searchingly. Do you fully understand, Renaud, that on the answers you have given me I shall have no alternative but to commit you for trial? Jack's pale face flushed. He looked steadily back. Monsieur Hotep, I swear that I did not kill my father. But the magistrate's brief moment of doubt was over. He laughed a short unpleasant iau. Without doubt they are always innocent, our prisoners. By your own mouth you are condemned. You can offer no defense, no alibi, only a mere assertion which would not deceive a babe, that you are not guilty. You killed your father, Renaud, a cruel and cowardly murder for the sake of the money which you believed would come to you at his death. Your mother was an accessory after the fact. Doubtless, in view of the fact that she acted as a mother, the courts will extend an indulgence to her that they will not accord to you. And are at LTLY so. Your crime was a horrible one to be held in abhorrence by gods and men. Imhotep was interrupted to his intense annoyance. The door was pushed open. Monsieur Le Joug, stammered the attendant. There is a lady who who says what? Cried the justly incensed magistrate. This is highly irregular. I forbid it, I absolutely forbid it. But a slender figure pushed the stammering gendarme aside. Dressed all in black, with a long veil that hid her face, she advanced into the room. My heart gave a sickening. She had come then. All my efforts were in vain, yet I could not but admire the courage that had led her to take this step so unfalteringly. She raised her veil and I gasped. For, though as like her as two peas, this girl was not Cinderella. On the other hand, now that I saw her without the fair wig she had worn on the stage, I recognized her as the girl of the photograph in Jack Renaud's room. You are the Joug d'Instruction, Monsieur Hotep, she queried. Yes, but I forbid. My name is Bella Diavine. I wish to give myself up for the murder of Mr. Renaud. 26-1 Receive a letter, my friend. You will know all when you get this. Nothing that I can say will move Bella. She has gone out to give herself up. I am tired out with struggling. You will know now that I deceived you, that where you gave me trust one repaid you with lies. It will seem, perhaps, indefensible to you, but I should like, before I go out of your life forever, to show you just how it all came about. If I knew that you forgave me, it would make life easier for me. It wasn't for myself I did it, that's the only thing I can put forward to say for myself. I 11 begin from the day I met you in the boat train from Paris. I was uneasy then about Bella. She was just desperate about Jack Renaud. She'd have lain down on the ground for him to walk on, and when he began to change, and to stop writing so often, she began getting in a state. She got it into her head that he was keen on another girl, and of course, as it turned out afterwards, she was quite right there. She'd made up her mind to go to their villa at Merlinville, and try and see Jack. She knew I was against it, and tried to give me the slip. I found she was not on the train at Calais, and determined I would not go on to England without her. I'd an uneasy feeling that something was going to happen if I couldn't prevent it. I met the next train from Paris. She was on it, and set upon going out then and there to Merlinville. I argued with her for all I was worth, but it wasn't any good. She was all strung up and set upon having her own way. Well, I washed my hands of it. I'd done all I could. It was getting late. I went to an hotel, and Bella started for Merlinville. I still couldn't shake off my feeling of what the books call inventing disaster. The next day came but no Bella. She'd made a date with me to meet at the hotel, but she didn't keep it. No sign of her all day. I got more and more armious. Then came an evening paper with the news. It was awful. I couldn't be sure, I was terribly afraid. I figured it out that Bella had met Papa Reynald and told him about her and Jack, and that he'd insulted her or something like that. We've both got terribly quick tempers. Then all the masked foreigner business came out, and I began to feel more at ease. But it still worried me that Bella hadn't kept her date with me. By the next morning I was so rattled that I'd just got to go and see what I could. First thing, I ran up against you. You know all that. When I saw the dead man, looking so like Jack, and wearing Jack's fancy overcoat, I knew. And there was the identical paper knife, wicked little thing, that Jack had given Bella. 10 to 1 it had her finger marks on it. I can't hope to explain to you the sort of helpless horror of that moment. I only saw one thing clearly: I must get hold of that dagger, and get right away with it before they found out it was gone. I pretended to faint, and while you were away getting water I took the thing and hid it away in my dress. I told you that I was staying at the Hotel du Fer, but of course really I made a beeline back to Calais, and then on to England by the first boat. When we were in mid-channel I dropped that little devil of a dagger into the sea. Then I felt I could breathe again. Bella was in our digs in London. She looked like nothing on God's earth. I told her what I'd done, and that she was pretty safe for the time being. She stared at me, and then began laughing. Ling. Laughing. It was horrible to hear her. I felt that the best thing to do was to keep busy. She'd go mad if she had time to brood on what she'd done. Luke HLY, we got an engagement at once. And then, I saw you and your friend watching us that night. I was frantic. You must suspect, or you wouldn't have tracked us down. I had to know the worst, so I followed you. I was desperate. And then, before I'd had time to say anything, I tumbled to it that it was me you suspected, not Bella. Or at least that you thought I was Bella, since I'd stolen the dagger. I wish, honey, that you could see back into my mind at that moment. You'd forgive me, perhaps. I was so frightened, and muddled, and desperate. All I could get clearly was that you would try and save me. I didn't know whether you'd be willing to save her. I thought very likely not. It wasn't the same thing. And I couldn't risk it. Bella's my twin. I'd got to do the best for her. So I went on lying. I felt mean. I feel mean still. That's all I knew at L2, you'll say, I expect. I ought to have trusted you. If I had, as soon as the news was in the paper that Jack Reynald had been arrested, it was all up. Bella wouldn't even wait to see how Ewlings went. I'm very tired. I can't type any more. She had begun to sign herself Cinderella, but had crossed that out and written instead, Ulci, Yavine. It was an ill-written, blurred epistle, but I have kept it to this day. Poirot was with me when I read it. The sheets fell from my hand, and I looked across it. Did you know all the time that it was the other? Yes, my friend. Why did you not tell me? To begin with, I could hardly believe it conceivable that you could make such a mistake. You had seen the photograph. The sisters are very alike, but by no means incapable of distinguishment. But the fair hair. A wig, worn for the sake of a piquant contrast on the stage. Is it conceivable that with twins one should be fair and one dark? Why didn't you tell me that night at the hotel in Coventry? You were rather high-handed in your methods, mon ami, said Poirot dryly. You did not give me a chance. But afterwards? Ah, afterwards. Well, to begin with, I was hurt at your want of faith in me. And then, I wanted to see whether your feelings would stand the test of time. In fact, whether it was love, or a flash in the pan, with you, I should not have left you long in your error. I nodded. His tone was too affectionate for me to bear resentment. I looked down on the sheets of the letter. Suddenly I picked them up from the floor, and pushed them across to read that. I said, "I'd like you to." He read it in silence, then he looked at me. "What is it that worries you, Hastings?" This was quite a new mood in Poirot. His mocking manner seemed laid quite aside. I was able to say what I wanted without too much difficulty. She doesn't say well, not whether she cares for me or not." Poirot turned back the pages. "I think you are mistaken, Hastings." "Where?" I cried, leaning forward eagerly. Poirot smiled. "She tells you that in every line of the letter, mon amount, but where am I to find her? There's no address on the letter. There's a French stamp, that's all. Excite yourself not. Leave it to Papa Poirot. I can find her for you as soon as I have 5 little minutes." 27 Jack Renaud's story. "Congratulations, Monsieur Jack," said Poirot, wringing the lad warmly by the hand. Young Renaud had come to us as soon as he was liberated before starting for Merlinville to rejoin Martha and his mother. Stoner conveyed him his heartiness was in strong contrast to the lad's wan looks. It was plain that the boy was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He smiled mournfully at Poirot, and said in a low voice, "I went it to protect her, and now it's all no use." "You could hardly expect the girl to accept the price if I owe you your life," remarked Stoner dryly. "She was bound to come forward when she saw you heading straight for the guillotine." "Ma foi. And you were heading for it too," added Poirot, with a slight twinkle. "You would have had Maitre Grosier's death from rage on your conscience if I had gone om. He was a well-meaning ass," I said Jack, "but he worried me horribly. You see, I couldn't very well take him into my confidence. But, my God! What's going to happen about Bella?" "LFL were you," said Poirot frankly, "I should not distress myself unduly. The French courts are very lenient to youth and beauty, and the crime passional. A clever lawyer will make out a great case of extenuating circumstances. It will not be pleasant for you, I don't care about that. You see, Monsieur Poirot, in a way I do feel guilty of my father's murder. But for me, and my entanglement with this girl, he would be alive and well today. And then my cursed carelessness in taking away the wrong overcoat. I can't help feeling responsible for his death. It will haunt me forever." "No, no," I said soothingly. "Of course it's horrible to me to think that Bella killed my father," resumed Jack, "but I treated her shamefully. After I met Martha, and realized I'd made a mistake, I ought to have written and told her so honestly. But I was so terrified of a row, and of its coming to Enlerth's ears, and her thinking there was more in it than there ever had been, that well, I was a coward, and went on hoping the thing would die down of itself. I just drifted, in fact not realizing that I was driving the poor kid desperate. If she'd really knifed me, as she meant to, I should have got no more than my deserts. And the way she has come forward now is downright LT plucky. I'd have stood the racket, you know, up to the end." He was silent for a moment or two, and then burst out on another tack. "What gets me is why the governor should be wandering about in underclothes and my overcoat at that time. I suppose he'd just given the foreign Johnnies the slip, and my mother must have made a mistake about its being 2 o'clock when they came. Or, it wasn't all a frame-up, was it? I mean, my mother couldn't think that it was me." Poirot reassured him quickly. No, Monsieur Jack. Have no fears on that score. As for the rest, I will explain it to you one of these days. It is rather curious. But will you recount to us exactly what did occur on that terrible evening? There's very little to tell. I came from Cherbourg, as I told you, in order to see Martha before going to the other end of the world. The train was late, and I decided to take the shortcut across the golf links. I could easily get into the grounds of the Villa Marguerite from there. I had nearly reached the place when he paused and swallowed. Yes, I heard a terrible cry. It wasn't loud, a sort of choke and gasp, but it frightened me. For a moment I stood rooted to the spot, Then I came round the corner of a bush. There was moonlight. I saw the grave, and a figure lying face downwards with a dagger sticking in the back. And then I looked up and saw her. She was looking at me as though she saw us what she must have thought me at first. All expression seemed frozen out of her face by horror. And then she gave a cry, and turned and ran. He stopped, trying to master his emotion. And afterwards, asked Poirot gently. I really don't know. I stayed there for a time, dazed. And then I realized I'd better get away as fast as I could. It didn't occur to me that they would suspect me, but I was afraid of being called upon to give evidence against her. I walked to Saint Beauvais as I told you, and got a car from there back to Cherbourg. A knock came at the door, and a page entered with a telegram which he delivered to Stoner. He tore it open. Then he got up from his seat. Mrs. Renaud has regained consciousness, he said. Ah. Poirot sprang to his feet. Let us all go to Merlinville at once. A hurried departure was made forthwith. Stoner, at Jack's insistence, agreed to stay behind and do all that could be done for Bella Duveen. Poirot, Jack Renaud, and I set off in the Renaud car. The run took just over 40 minutes. As we approached the doorway of the Villa Marguerite, Jack Renaud shot a questioning glance at Poirot. How would it be if you went on first to break the news to my mother that I am free, while you break it in person to Mademoiselle Enlerth? Finished Poirot, with a twinkle. But yes, by all means, I was about to propose such an arrangement myself. Jack Renaud did not wait for more. Stopping the car, he swung himself out, and ran up the path to the front door. We went on in the car to the Villa Genevieve. Poirot, I said, do you remember how we arrived here that first day? And were met by the news of Mr. Renaud's murder? Ah, yes, truly. Not so long ago either. But what a lot of things have happened since then, especially for you, mon ami. Yes, indeed, is at lead. You are regarding it from the sentimental standpoint, Hastings. That was not my meaning. We will hope that Mademoiselle Bella will be dealt with leniently, and after all Jack Renaud cannot marry both the girls. I spoke from a professional standpoint. This is not a crime well ordered and regular, such as a detective delights in the mise en scène designed by Georges Queneau, that indeed is perfect, but the denouement, no. A man killed by accident in a girl's fit of anger, indeed, what order or method is therein? And in the midst of a fit of laughter on my part at Poirot's peculiarities, the door was opened by Frangoisse. Poirot explained that he must see Mrs. Renaud at once, and the old woman conducted him upstairs. I remained in the salon. It was some time before Poirot reappeared. He was looking unusually grave. Vous voilà, Hastings. Sacre tenir. But there are squalls ahead. What do you mean? I cried. I would hardly have credited it, said Poirot thoughtful, but women are very unexpected. Here are Jack and Martha d'Aubreuil, I exclaimed, looking out of the window. Poirot bounded out of the room, and met the young couple on the steps outside. Do not enter. It is better not. Your mother is very clow, said Jack Renaud. I must go up to her at once. But no, I tell you. It is better not. But Martha and one, in any case, do not take Mademoiselle with you. Mount, if I must, but you would be wise to be guided by me. A voice on the stairs behind made us all start. I thank you for your good offices, Monsieur Poirot, but I will make my own wishes clear. We stared in astonishment. Descending the stairs, leaning on Leonie's arm was Mrs. Renaud, her head still bandaged. The French girl was weeping, and imploring her mistress to return to bed. Madame will kill herself. It is contrary to all the doctor's orders. But Nears. Renaud came on. Mother, cried Jack, starting forward. But with a gesture she drove him back. I am no mother of yours. You are no son of mine. From this day and hour I renounce you, mother, cried the lad, stupefied. For a moment she seemed to waver, to falter before the anguish in his voice. Poirot made a mediating gesture. But instantly she regained command of herself. Your father's blood is on your head. You are morally guilty of his death. You thwarted and defied him over this girl, and by your heartless treatment of another girl, you brought about his death. Go out from my house. Tomorrow I intend to take such steps as shall make it certain that you shall never touch a penny of his money. Make your way in the world as best you can with the help of the girl who is the daughter of your father's bitterest enemy." And slowly, painfully, she retraced her way. We were all dumbfounded, totally unprepared for such a demonstration. Jack Reinald, worn out with all he had already gone, swayed and nearly fell. Poirot and I went quickly to his assistance. "He is overdone," murmured Poirot to Martha. Here can we take him?" "But home. To the Villa Marguerite. We will nurse him, my mother and I. My poor Jack." We got the lad to the villa, where he dropped limply onto a chair in a semi-dazed condition. Poirot felt his head and hands. "He has fever. The long strain begins to tell. And now this shock on top of it. Get him to bed, and Hastings and I will summon a doctor." A doctor was soon procured. After examining the patient, he gave it as his opinion that it was certainly a case of nerve strain. With perfect rest and quiet, the lad might be almost restored by the next day, but, if excited, there was a chance of brain fever. It would be advisable for someone to sit up all night with him. Finally, having done all we could, we left him in the charge of Martha and her mother, and set out for the turn. It was past our usual hour of dining, and we were both famished. The first restaurant we came to assuaged the pangs of hunger with an excellent omelette, and an equally excellent entrecôte to follow. "And now for quarters for the night," said Poirot, when at length Café Noir had cornplated the meal. "Shall we try our old friend, the Hôtel de Bains?" We traced our steps there without more ado. Yes, messieurs could be accommodated with 2 good rooms overlooking the sea. Then Poirot asked a question which surprised: "Has an English lady, Miss Robinson, arrived?" "Yes, monsieur. She is in the little salon." "Poirot," I cried, keeping pace with him, as he walked along the corridor, "who on earth is Miss Robinson?" Poirot beamed kindly on me. "It is that I have arranged you a marriage, Hastings." "But I say, bah," said Poirot, giving me a friendly push over the threshold of the door. "Do you think I wish to trumpet aloud in Merlinville the name of Diavine?" It was indeed Cinderella who rose to greet us. I took her hand in both of mine. My eyes said the rest. Poirot cleared his mess en faune. He said, "For the moment we have no time for sentiment. There is work ahead of us. Mademoiselle, were you able to do what I asked you?" In response, Cinderella took from her bag an object wrapped up in paper, and handed it silently to Poirot. The latter unwrapped it. I gave a start, for it was the aeroplane dagger which I understood she had cast into the sea. Strange, how reluctant women always are to destroy the most compromising of objects and documents. "Très bien, mon enfant," said Poirot. "I am pleased with you. Go now and rest yourself. Hastings here and I have work to do. You shall see him tomorrow." "Where are you going?" asked the girl, her eyes widening. "You shall hear all about it tomorrow. Because wherever you're going, I'm coming too." "But, mademoiselle, I'm coming too, I tell you." Poirot realized that it was futile to argue. He gave in. "Come then, mademoiselle. But it will not be amusing. In all probability nothing will happen." The girl made no reply. 20 minutes later we set forth. It was quite dark now, a close oppressive evening. Poirot led the way out of the turn in the direction of the Villa Genevieve. But when he reached the Villa Marguerite he paused. "I should like to assure myself that all goes well with Jack Reinald. Come with me, Hastings. Mademoiselle will perhaps remain outside. Madame d'Aubruil might say something which would wound her." We unlatched the gate, and walked up the path. As we went round to the side of the house, I drew Poirot's attention to a window on the first floor. Thrown sharply on the blind was the profile of Martha d'Aubruil. "Ah," said Poirot. "I figure to myself that that is the room where we shall find Jack Reinald." And Madame d'Aubruil opened the door to us. She explained that Jack was much the same, but perhaps we would like to see for ourselves. She led us upstairs and into the bedroom. Martha D'Abreuil was sitting by a table with a lamp on it, working. She put her finger to her lips as we entered. Jack Renaud was sleeping an uneasy, floatal sleep, his head turning from side to side, and his face still unduly flushed. "Is the doctor coming, Agam?" asked Poirot in a whisper. "Not unless we send. He is sleeping, that is the great thing. Maman made him a tisane." She sat down again with her embroidery as we left the room. Madame D'Abreuil accompagned us down the stairs. Since I had learned of her past history, I viewed this woman with increased interest. She stood there with her eyes cast down, the same very faint enigmatical smile that I remembered on her lips. And suddenly I felt afraid of her, as one might feel afraid of a beautiful poisonous snake. "I hope we have not deranged you, madame," said Poirot politely, as she opened the door for us to pass out. "Not at all, monsieur." "By the way," said Poirot, as though struck by an afterthought, "Monsieur Stolner has not been in Merlinville today, has he?" I could not at all fathom the point of this question, which I well knew to be meaningless as far as Poirot was concerned. And Madame D'Abreuil replied quite convosely, "Not that I know of. He has not had an interview with Madame Renaud." "How should I know that, monsieur?" "True," said Poirot. "I thought you might have seen him coming or going, that is all." "Madame." "Why," I began. "No whys, Hastings. There will be time for that later." We rejoined Cinderella and made our way rapidly in the direction of the Villa Genevieve. Poirot looked over his shoulder once at the lighted window and the profile of Enler as she bent over her work. "He is being guarded at all events," he muttered. Arrived at the Villa Genevieve, Poirot took up his stand behind some bushes to the left of the drive, where, while enjoying a good view ourselves, we were conveniently hidden from sight. The villa itself was in total darkness, everybody was without doubt in bed and asleep. We were almost immediately under the window of Mrs. Renaud's bedroom, which window, I noticed, was open. It seemed to me that it was upon this spot that Poirot's eyes were fixed. "What are we going to do?" I whispered. "Watch, but I do not expect anything to happen for at least an hour, probably 2 hours, but his words were interrupted by a long, thin draw and cry, "Help! IIW!" It flashed up in the first floor room on the right-hand side of the front door. The cry came from there. And even as we watched, there came a shadow on the blind as of 2 people struggling. "Mille tonnerres!" cried Poirot. "She must have changed her room." Dashing forward, he battered wildly on the front door. Then rushing to the tree in the flower bed, he swarmed up it with the agility of a cat. I followed him, as with a bound he sprang in the open window. Looking over my shoulder, I saw Dulcie reaching the branch behind me. "Take care," I exclaimed. "Take care of your grandmother," retorted the girl. "This is child's play to me." Poirot had rushed the empty room and was pounding on the door. "Locked and bolted on the outside," he growled. "And it will take time to burst it open." The cries for help were getting noticeably fainter. I saw despair in Poirot's eyes. He and I together put our shoulders to the door. Cinderella's voice, calm and dispassionate, came from the window, "You'll be too late. I guess I'm the only one who can do anything." Before I could move a hand to stop her, she appeared to leap from the window into space. I rushed and looked out. To my horror, I saw her hanging by her hands from the roof, propelling herself along by jerks in the direction of the lighted window. "Good heavens! She'll be killed," I cried. "You forget. She's a professional acrobat, Hastings. It was the providence of the good God that made her insist on coming with us tonight. I only pray that she may be in time." All. A cry of absolute terror floated out onto the night, as the girl disappeared through the window, and then in Cinderella's clear tones came the words, "No, you don't. I've got you and my wrists are just like steel." At the same moment the door of our prison was opened cautiously by Frangoise. Poirot brushed her aside unceremoniously and rushed down the passage to where the other maids were grouped round the farther door. "It's locked on the inside, Monsieur Dot." There was the sound of a heavy fall within. After a moment or two the key tuned and the door swung slowly open. Cinderella, very pale, beckoned us and she is safe, demanded Poirot. Yes, I was just in time. She was exhausted. Nears. Renaud was half sitting, half lying on the bed. She was gasping for breath, nearly strangled me, she murmured painfully. The girl picked up something from the floor and handed it to Poirot. It was a rolled-up ladder of silk rope, very fine but quite strong. A getaway, said Poirot. By the window, while we were battering at the door. Where is the other? The girl stood aside a little and pointed. On the ground lay a figure wrapped in some dark material, a fold of which hid the face. Dead. She nodded. I think so. Head must have struck the marble fender. But who is it? I cried. The murderer of Renaud, Hastings. And the would-be murderer of Madame Renaud. Puzzled and uncomprehending, I knelt down, and lifting the fold of cloth, looked into the dead beautiful face of Martha d'Aubreuil. 28 journeys and I have confused memories of the further events of that night. Poirot seemed deaf to my repeated questions. He was engaged in overwhelming Frango essay with reproaches for not having told him of Mrs. Renaud's change of sleeping quarters. I caught him by the shoulder, determined to attract his attention, and make myself heard. But you must have known, I expostulated. You were taken up to see her this afternoon. Poirot deigned to attend to me for a brief moment. She had been wheeled on a sofa into the middle room, her boudoir, he explained. But, monsieur, cried Frango essay, Madame changed her room almost immediately after the crimes. The associations they were too distressing. Then why was I not told, vociferated Poirot, striking the table, and working himself into a first-class passion. I demand of you, why was I not told? You are an old woman completely imbecile. And Leonie and Denise are no better. All of you are triple idiots. Your stupidity has nearly caused the death of you, mistress. But for this courageous child, he broke off, and, darting across the room to where the girl was bending over ministering to Mrs. Renaud, he embraced her with Gallic to my annoyance. I was aroused from my condition of mental fog by a sharp command from Poirot to fetch the doctor immediately on Nears. Renaud's behalf. After that, I might summon the police. And he added, to complete my dudgeon, it will hardly be worth your while to return here. I shall be too busy to attend to you, and of mademoiselle here I make a garde malade. I retired with what dignity I could command. Having done my errands, I returned to the hotel. I understood next to nothing of what had occurred. The events of the night seemed fantastic and impossible. Nobody would answer my questions. Nobody had seemed to hear them. Angrily, I flung myself into bed, and slept the sleep of the bewildered and utterly exhausted. I awoke to find the sun pouring in the open windows and Poirot, neat and smiling, sitting beside the bed. Enfin, you wake. But it is that you are a famous sleeper, Hastings. Do you know that it is nearly 11 o'clock? I groaned and put a hand to my head. I must have been dreaming, I said. Do you know, I actually dreamt that we found Martha d'Aubreuil's body in Nears. Renaud's room, and that you declared her to have murdered Renaud. You were not dreaming. All that is quite true. But Bella Yvonne killed Mr. Renaud. Oh no, Hastings, she did not. She said she did, yes, but that was to save the man she loved from the guillotine. Remember Jack Renaud's story. They both arrived on the scene on the same instant, and each took the other to be the perpetrator of the crime. The girl stares at him in horror, and then with a cry rushes away. But, when she hears that the crime has been brought home to him, she cannot bear it, and comes forward to accuse herself and save him from certain death. Poirot leaned back in his chair, and brought the tips of his fingers together in familiar style. The case was not quite satisfactory to me, he observed judicially. All along I was strongly under the impression that we were dealing with a cold-blooded and premeditated crime committed by someone who had contented themselves, very cleverly, with using Monsieur Renaud's own plans for throwing the police off the track. The great criminal, as you may remember my remarking to you once, is always supremely sinful. I nodded. Now, to support this theory, the criminal must have been fully cognizant of Monsieur Renaud's plans. That leads us to Niers. Renaud. But facts fail to support any theory of her guilt. Is there anyone else who might have any of them? Yes. From Martha d'Aubruil's own lips we have the admission that she overheard Renaud's quarrel with the tramp. If she could overhear that, there is no reason why she should not have heard everything else, especially if Mr. and Madame Renaud were imprudent enough to discuss their plans sitting on the bench. Remember how easily you overheard Martha's conversation with Jack Renaud from that spot. But what possible motive could Martha have for murdering Renaud? I argued. What motive? Money. Renaud was a millionaire several times over, and at his death, or so she and Jack believed, half that vast fortune would pass to his son. Let us reconstruct the scene from the standpoint of Martha d'Aubruil. Martha d'Aubruil overhears what passes between Renaud and his wife. So far he has been a nice little source of income to the d'Aubruil mother and daughter, but now he proposes to escape from their toils. At first, possibly, her idea is to prevent that escape. But a bolder idea takes its place, and one that fails to horrify the daughter of Jean Baroldi. At present Renaud stands inexorably in the way of her marriage with Jack. If the latter defies his father, he will be a pauper, which is not at all to the mind of Mademoiselle Martha. In fact, I doubt if she has ever cared a straw for Jack Renaud. She can simulate emotion, but in reality she is of the same cold, calculating type as her mother. I doubt, too, whether she was really very sure of her hold over the boy's affections. She had dazzled and captivated Hero, but separated from her, as his father could so easily manage to separate Hero, she might lose him. But with Renaud dead, and Jack the heir to half his millions, the marriage can take place at once, and at a stroke she will attain wealth, not the beggarly thousands that have been extracted from him so far. And her clever brain takes in the simplicity of the thing. It is all so easy. Renaud is planning all the circumstances of his death. She has only to step in at the right moment and turn the farce into a grim reality. And here comes in the second point which led me infallibly to Martha d'Aubruil, the dagger. Jack Renaud had 3 souvenirs made. One he gave to his mother, one to Bella Duveen. Was it not highly probable that he had given the third one to Martha d'Aubruil? So, then, to sum up, there were 4 points of note against Martha d'Aubruil. 1. Enlerth d'Aubruil could have overheard Renaud's plans. 2. Enlerth d'Aubruil had a direct interest in causing Renaud's death. 3. Enlerth d'Aubruil was the daughter of the notorious Madame Baroldi, who in my opinion was morally and virtually the murderess of her husband, although it may have been Georges Quinault's hand which struck the actual blow. 4. Enlerth d'Aubruil was the only person, besides Jack Renaud, likely to have the third dagger in her possession. Poirot paused and cleared his throat. Of course, when I learned of the existence of the other girl, Bella Duveen, I realized that it was quite possible that she might have killed Renaud. The solution did not commend itself to me, because, as I pointed out to you, Hastings, an expert, such as Ionu, likes to meet a foeman worthy of his steel. Still, one must take crimes as one finds them, not as one would like them to be. It did not seem very likely that Bella Duveen would be wandering about carrying a souvenir paper knife in her hand, but of course she might have had some idea all the time of revenging herself on Jack Renaud. When she actually came forward and confessed to the murder, it seemed that all was over. And yet I was not satisfied, mon ami. I was not satisfied. I went over the case again minutely, and I came to the same conclusion as before. If it was not Bella Duveen, the only other person who could have committed the crime was Martha d'Aubruil. But I had not one single proof against her. And then you showed me that letter from Mademoiselle Dulcie, and I saw a chance of settling the matter once for all. The original dagger was stolen by Dulcie Duveen and into the sea since, as she thought, it belonged to her sister. But if, by any chance, it was not her sister's, but the one given by Jack to Martha d'Aubruil, why then, Bella Duveen's dagger would be still intact. I said no word to you, Hastings, it was no time for romance, but I sought out Mademoiselle Dulcie, told her as much as I deemed needful, and set her to search among the effects of her sister. Imagine my elation, when she sought me out, according to my instructions, as Miss Robinson, with the precious souvenir in her possession. In the meantime I had taken steps to force Mademoiselle Martha into the open by my orders, and Madame Renaud repulsed her son, and declared her intention of making a will on the morrow which should cut him off from ever enjoying even a portion of his father's fortune. It was a desperate step, but a necessary one, and Madame Renaud was fully prepared to take the risk, though unfortunately she also never thought of mentioning her change of room. I suppose she took it for granted that I knew. All happened as I thought. Martha d'Aubreuil made a last bold bid for the Renaud millions and failed. What absolutely bewilders me, I said, is how she ever got into the house without our seeing her. It seems an absolute miracle. We left her behind at the Villa Marguerite, we go straight to the Villa Genevieve, and yet she is there before us. Ah, but we did not leave her behind. She was out of the Villa Marguerite by the back way while we were talking to her mother in the hall. That is where, as the Americans say, she put it over on Hercule Poirot. But the shadow on the blind. We saw it from the road. Eh bien, when we looked up, Madame d'Aubreuil had just had time to run upstairs and take her place. Madame d'Aubreuil? Yes. One is old, and one is young, one dark, and one fair, but, for the purpose of a silhouette on a blind, their profiles are singularly alike. Even I did not suspect, triple imbecile that I was. I thought I had plenty of time before me, that she would not try to gain admission to the villa until much later. She had brains, that beautiful mademoiselle, and her object was to murder Mrs. Renaud. Yes. The whole fortune would then pass to her son, but it would have been suicide, mon ami. On the floor by Martha d'Aubreuil's body, I found a pad and a little bottle of chloroform and a hypodermic syringe containing a fatal dose of morphine. You understand. The chloroform first, then when the victim is unconscious the prick of the needle. By the morning the smell of the chloroform has quite disappeared, and the syringe lies where it has fallen from Madame Renaud's hand. What would he say, the excellent Monsieur Hotet? Poor woman! What did I tell you? The shock of joy, it was too much on top of the rest. Did I not say that I should not be surprised if her brain became unhinged? Altogether a most tragic case, the Renaud case. However, Hastings, things did not go quite as Mademoiselle Martha had planned. To begin with, Madame Renaud was awake and waiting for her. There is a struggle. But Madame Renaud is terribly weak still. There is a last chance for Martha d'Aubreuil. The idea of suicide is at an end, but if she can silence Madame Renaud with her strong hands, make a getaway with her little silk ladder while we are still battering on the inside of the farther door, and be back at the Villa Marguerite before we return there, it will be hard to prove anything against her. But she was checkmated, not by Hercule Poirot, but by La Petite Acrobate with her tests of steel. I mused over the whole story. When did you first begin to suspect Martha d'Aubreuil, Poirot? When she told us she had overheard the quarrel in the garden. Poirot smiled. My friend, do you remember when we drove into Merlinville that first day? And the beautiful girl we saw standing at the gate? You asked me if I had noticed a young goddess, and I replied to you that I had seen only a girl with amias eyes. That is how I have thought of Enlert d'Aubreuil from the beginning. The girl with the anxious eyes. Why was she amias? Not on Jacques Renaud's behalf, for she did not know then that he had been in Merlinville the previous evening. By the way, I exclaimed, how is Jacques Renaud? Much better. He is still at the Villa Marguerite. But Madame d'Aubreuil has disappeared. The police are looking for her. Was she in with her daughter, do you think? We shall never know. Madame is a lady who can keep her secrets. And I doubt very much if the police will ever find her. Has Jacques Renaud been told? Not yet. It will be a terrible shock to him, naturally. And yet, do you know, Hastings, I doubt if his heart was ever seriously engaged. So far we have looked upon Bella Duveen as a siren, and Martha d'Aubreuil as the girl he really loved. But I think that if we reversed the terms we should come nearer to the truth. Enlert d'Aubreuil was very beautiful. She set herself to fascinate Jack, and she succeeded, but remember his curious reluctance to break with the other girl. And see how he was willing to go to the guillotine rather than implicate her. I have a little idea that when he learns the truth, he will be horrified, revolted, and his false love will wither away. What about Giroux? He has a crisis of the nerves, that one. He has been obliged to return to Paris. We both smiled. Poirot proved a fairly true prophet. When at length the doctor pronounced Jacques Renaud strong enough to hear the truth, it was Poirot who broke it to him. The shock was indeed terrific. Yet Jacques rallied better than I could have supposed possible. His mother's devotion helped him to live those difficult days. The mother and son were inseparable now. There was a further revelation to come. Poirot had acquainted Mrs. Renaud with the fact that he knew her secret, and had represented to her that Jacques should not be left in ignorance of his father's past. To hide the truth, never does it avail, madam. Be brave and tell him everything. With a heavy heart and ears, Renaud consented, and her son learned that the father he had loved had been in actual fact a fugitive from justice. A halting question was promptly answered by Poirot. Reassure yourself, Monsieur Jacques. The world knows nothing. As far as I can see, there is no obligation for me to take the police into my confidence. Throughout the case I have acted, not for them, but for your father. Justice overtook him at last, but no one need ever know that he and Georges Quinault were one and the same. There were, of course, various points in the case that remained puzzling to the police, but Poirot explained things in so plausible a fashion that all query about them was gradually stilled. Shortly after we got back to London, I noticed a magnificent model of a foxhound adorning Poirot's mantelpiece. In answer to my inquiring glance, Poirot nodded. Mais oui. I got my 500 francs. Is he not a splendid fellow? I call him Giroux. A few days later Jacques Renaud came to see us with a resolute expression on his face. Monsieur Poirot, I've come to say goodbye. I'm sailing for South America almost immediately. My father had large interests over the continent, and I mean to start a new life out there. You go alone, Monsieur Jacques. My mother comes with me and I shall keep Stoner on as my secretary. He likes out-of-the-way parts of the world. No one else goes with you. Jack flushed. You mean? A girl who loves you very dearly, who has been willing to lay down her life for you. How could I ask her, muttered the boy. After all that has happened, could I go to her and what sort of a lame story could I tell? Les femmes, they have a wonderful genius for manufacturing crutches for stories like, yes, but I've been such a damned fool. So have all of us, one time and another, observed Poirot philosophically. But Jacques' face had hardened. There's something else. I'm my father's son. Would anyone marry me, knowing that? You are your father's son, you say. Hastings here will tell you that I believe in heredity. Well, then wait. I am a woman of courage and endurance, capable of great love, of supreme self-sacrifice. The boy looked up. His eyes softened. My mother. Yes. You are your mother's son as well as your father's. Then go to Mademoiselle Bella. Tell her everything. Keep nothing back and see what she will say. Jack looked irresolute. Go to her as a boy no longer, but a man bowed by the fate of the past, and the fate of today, but looking forward to a new and wonderful life. Ask her to share it with you. You may not realize it, but your love for each other has been tested in the fire and not found wanting. You have both been willing to lay down your lives for each other. And what of Captain Arthur Hastings, humble chronicler of these pages? There is some talk of his joining the Renauds on a ranch across the seas, but for the end of this story I prefer to go back to a morning in the garden of the Villa Genevieve. I can't call you Bella, I said, since it isn't your name. And Dulcie seems so unfamiliar. So it's got to be Cinderella. Cinderella married the prince, you remember. I'm not a prince, but she interrupted me. Cinderella warned him, I'm sure. You see, she couldn't promise to turn into a princess. She was only a little scullion after all. It's the princess' turn to interrupt, I interpolated. Do you know what he said? Hell, said the prince and kissed her. and I suited the action to the word.